Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in. Hopefully you had a good weekend. It's Monday morning here. What's the date? June 18th? Yeah, June 18th. So just as far as due dates go, we passed on Friday the due date for the Matthew Arnold unit, and then we're going into Unit 10 here today as due the Brownings. The Matthew Arnold unit would have focused on him as an author, but the assignment was to investigate or think about the Victorian period as not so much an issue that was dominated by, or an age that was dominated by one particular issue, but an age that was indeed an age of issues. And in fact, it was not a single change that really came to characterize that age, but simply the pace of change itself. And so our work with that unit was really reflective of just how many things were changing so rapidly and so dramatically for so many people. So there was really interesting work done for our discussion board here as far as various issues that people tackled, whether it was empire, child labor, and some of those images are really horrifying, the working conditions or living conditions for women at the time period, issues of sort of like fashion or social mores, social constraints. The sex trade was, again, an issue that is sort of typical of the Victorian period, because while stereotypically the Victorian, and even that term, just generally speaking, is used to denote something that's very, it subscribes to the rules of propriety and decorum, and it's a very kind of constrained age, or at least on the surface, a very proper kind of age. For as much as the age is characterized by that sort of propriety, there's really this sort of underbelly of that age that is quite dark and dangerous for many people, whether again it's the issue of prostitution or issues of child labor, which are, horrifying in and of themselves, but are actually not a product of a system that doesn't work, but actually a logical result of a system that at the time required that kind of cheap, manageable labor. So all of those issues begin to get tied together as far as the empire being possible, because it's driven by these kinds of social conditions that are imposed on so many people. So to have so much cheap labor concentrated in the cities, that's not a mistake in the system, that's actually a fundamental condition required by the system. And as lots of people discovered here, there were many writers, among others, who were fighting in a very direct way, like the work of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's not a sort of metaphorical approach that she takes, it's a direct confrontation with so many of these issues. So that's one of the most interesting units we cover, in as much as we don't focus on an author per se, but on sort of the context of the age. Ends up being Unit 9. And then of course Unit 10 we do focus a little bit more specifically on the Brownings as an author set. And then we move into Modernism. The unit is due on the 20th, and the Modernism unit is actually a little bit like the Victorian unit here that we've just covered. So we talk a little bit about W.B. Yeats, which is one of those kind of pre-modern but also early modern figures, one of those sort of pivot figures. But you'll see that a lot of what we talk about is more of the context of the age, and again, it's like the pace of change has gotten to the point where the hubris of the Victorian period, like it's expressed in the Crystal Palace and the Great Exhibition, for example, or in just the scope of the empire, it's almost like it sort of begins to break apart, which is captured nicely in Yeats's The Second Coming, and the statement that the center cannot hold and things fall apart. It really had this kind of cultural, the time period had a cultural sense that things that had been believed in, the truth of empire or the ability of government, of right reason, of religious institutions, of education, to enable people to make individually good decisions, and this would just naturally produce a society that made good decisions. There was so much proof in the world that that just didn't work anymore, that again Yeats sums this up nicely in that statement about the center cannot hold and things fall apart. So the unit itself then has us looking at the way that modernism, kind of as a response to this sense of instability, of fragmentation, of things kind of coming unglued, is expressed in so many different fields. So we have literary modernism, of course, but it's also expressed in so many other art forms, whether it's architecture, dance, music, lots of the visual arts. So a little bit like the Victorian unit here, the modernism unit is having us look at and investigate some of that broader context and then report back in the discussion board. So even if you do just one particular kind of modernism or a small movement within modernism, by reading the other discussion board posts, you really do get a nice broad sense of what was happening. Same with the Victorian era stuff. Obviously your focus was relatively narrow, but in reading a few more of those discussion board posts, you get a really nice sense of just how many issues there were and how kind of drastic things were for so many people, which is part of what modernism is a response to, this kind of fragmentation or pulling apart of the institutions that were supposed to provide for everybody, but obviously really weren't. So we then get into main modernist authors as the units continue. Eliot, Woolf, and Joyce, again, just huge literary figures, and we really are getting actually fairly close to the end of our course. It's Monday. We have this week and just 1 week left, so just a couple weeks to go. Still a fair number of units to cover, but as long as you're keeping pace, staying on track, things should be fine. So again, if you have questions, concerns, anything going on, be in touch with me. But now's a good time to sort of look at those due dates and see what we have coming up in front of us. All right? I'll talk to everybody soon.